That's at learningandskillsgroup.com. That's a free community for learning and development professionals. Okay. I'm just going to, because I see somebody's having difficulty with their sound, going to drag something over which will stay on the screen for a moment, telling people how to dial in if they are having difficulties. So I'm just going to leave that there for the moment for CW, who's having some trouble. Okay, so yes, everything will be available afterwards at learningandskillsgroup.com, and shortly I will put the URL into the chat area so you've got that. My pleasure, CW, and I hope you'll hear from us shortly. Okay, now here we are, sound. Sound for this session will play through the headsets. If you can't hear it, then please do dial in, and the dial-in information is there on the screen for you. We do use chat a lot, and we, of course, have got kicked off with chat at the moment by getting people to answer the fairly trivial question, where are you and what's the weather like? No need to answer that question now. Okay, Susan, the dial-in details are there for you. I'm just going to type it in there for you. So, Susan, please dial in or check your audio settings, because I'm guessing that everyone else can hear. We use chat in this session extensively in order to get everybody's input. We have 137 people online with us at the moment. The idea is that we share as much as possible between us, as well as being inspired and learning from our speaker. So let's share with each other. Just one caveat. We did have an experience last week. At the end of the session last week, we had somebody sending out a LinkedIn message to everyone they'd found who'd attended the session, and they were selling their services. It's never happened before in something like 7 years of running these webinars. Please do bear in mind this is a sharing community. Our aim is to share with each other. Please accept that as it is, and I wouldn't expect people to be using this. I'm sure you wouldn't expect them to be using this opportunity to sell their services. This is an opportunity for us to learn from each other and, of course, from our speaker. If you enjoy the session, then please use this hashtag, #LSG Webinar. And I'm just going to hide the dial-in details, but I'll drop them into the text chat area shortly so you have them. #LSG Webinar if you've enjoyed it and if you want to tell people about what you've learned on the session. Let me just get the dial-in details for you. Okay. There we are. And that's probably enough from me. After all, we're not here to listen to Don doing housekeeping. We're here to listen to Simon Chilley of Reed Learning. About how to create great learning that has impact. Fortunately, he's got exactly that presentation ready for us, and I'll hand it over to him. Simon, over to you.
Hi, Don. Thanks very much, Don, and thanks everyone. I'm delighted to see so many of you here this morning. My name's Simon Chilley. I am Program Director at Reed Learning, and I'm going to take you this morning through some top tips to create learning with impact. So before we get going, this is the overview that hopefully some of you have seen before. This is essentially my plan for the session, but a bit about me. I've been in L&D my whole career. In fact, my master's dissertation was on transfer of learning, which is a topic that I'm hoping to kind of bring to life for you this morning. But I've been for my whole career extremely passionate to find out about how learning works, about how to make what we do relevant, important, significant, and how to make change happen. I work for Reed Learning, and Reed Learning established in 1995 as part of the Reed Global Group, and in those nearly 20 years we've worked with more than 2,500 clients, and what that does is that gives us a breadth of experience and expertise at a really practical level. So the session today is a mix of what we might call quote-unquote best practice. It's a lot of my personal experience and Reed Learning's experience, and there's a good dollop of kind of well-researched academic stuff in there as well. It's my intention this morning not to inundate you with figures and charts, but I will be making reference to some case studies which will pop up in the chat, so you'll see some links to some things which you can take away and digest really at your own leisure. So, for example, at the start of the year, we put a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about today in something called the Little Book of Impact, which you can find on our website, and hopefully in the next few seconds you'll see a link pop up in the chat which you can dive into and take away. But like I say, those are things for you to take away at your leisure, and I'll take you through some of the best parts of that this morning. So before we get too far into it, a lot of what I'll be talking about today is what the role of L&D really is. Now, for a long time, the role of L&D has been enable people to do something they couldn't do before, train them, give them something that they didn't know before. I'd like to ask you this question, and hopefully you can see the poll that's popped up. Is it L&D's role to change how people do their jobs? I'm going to pause for a moment and let you answer that. But hopefully some of you will have a view on that, so I'll just be quiet for a couple of seconds while you answer.
And you know what? I don't think, Simon, we've ever done a yes-no poll before in 7 years. It's great, forcing a decision. Which way is it? I, of course, can see the bars filling up now. Is it our role to change or not change? It's fascinating. We will broadcast the results very shortly because people are clearly voting very quickly on this. They feel strongly about it, and of course we'll have some comments in chat about it as well. We've got almost everybody in now. Shall I broadcast the results? Okay, I'm going to give a 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Jane says, I chose yes, but feel it's grayer, which is an interesting point. All right, let's end the poll and let's share the results. So there are the results, Simon. Almost split down the middle. What do you make of that?
Well, absolutely, yes. So split pretty much bang down the middle. And I imagine a lot of people would probably agree with Jane. Yes, forced to pick, we'll make a choice, but it probably is a little bit grayer. And I think for a number of years, L&D spent a long time trying to get people to stop calling it training, to call it learning and development instead. But I've been in rooms with a number of people who talk to managers and say, but that's not a training problem. Now, it's my contention that actually we do need to have a bigger role in changing how people do their jobs. And the case that I'm going to try and present in the next 30, 40 minutes is that we make change happen. Whether we like it or not, people come to us so that they can do things differently. We don't do everything. And I'm going to be the first to hold my hands up and say we don't own every action. But we do influence a lot. And the next half an hour is going to be very much about what we need to influence, some ideas about how we might do that, and finally just some tools and tips that we use that we try and use to make that really easy. So hopefully some real takeaways for you guys listening in this morning. The key is to create learning with impact, which is why the session is titled the way that it is. And when I say learning with impact, I mean learning which is applied. Now, for the sake of argument and for the sake of cutting short a much longer discussion, I've given you a few words here which I think describes what learning application is. So I think it's where learners use discretion to apply new skills or knowledge to the extent that workplace performance improves. Now, that's something that might take a few minutes to digest, so I'm grateful to say that you will be able to take this away and pick that definition apart. But just to unpack it slightly, when learners use discretion, so making that choice to do something differently rather than being forced to by inevitability or process, and then applying new skills or knowledge to the extent that workplace performance improves. So having a reason to do it, and that reason being for some good somewhere. Now, if we accept that, then that begs, I think, two questions. First question, why do people do things the way that they do? And then how do you change that? Those are quite big questions, but if we can answer them, then we're a long way there. The first question I think I can offer an answer to, if I can. Why do people do things the way they do? Now, this isn't my work at all, and I should be really upfront and honest about this. Expectancy theory and goal theory goes a long way back, far further than this conversation. So, I mean, for some 40 years we've been talking about things like this. I think actually when Don himself came to a breakfast briefing for Read Learning a little while ago, he talked about why people sometimes need to change the way they work, either being because they don't have the knowledge or skills, or because there's a problem with their motivation or environment. What I'm saying here is that people do things the way they do if they can see the link between a desirable and achievable task and a desirable, achievable outcome. So that's quite wordy. We could change that to because they can and because they want to. It's a bit more complicated than that, I'll accept, but for the purposes of discussion, let's have a look at that as a definition. So that's one question. The second question that I asked was, how do you change that? And that's really where the rest of this session comes in. And I can see already questions about whether motivation environment is an issue for L&D to address, and that's a very big question, and that's what I'm going to spend the rest of this webinar trying to answer. I think, like I said at the very beginning, we don't own every action, and we can't own every action, and we shouldn't try. But there are a lot of things that we try and make happen, but we could make happen a lot better if we understood the motivational environment factors. And I think these 3 steps that I put out on the screen in front of you here, which I hope you can all see, are the 3 steps that get us along that road. So if we can influence what people find desirable, motivate people, engage people, if we can enable them to change their behaviour, which is an area I think we're strong in, very strong in, and then finally influence the environment in which the behaviour must change, we're more likely to make an impact. And if we're more likely to make an impact, we're more likely to get the return on investment that we try so hard to find. Now, at this point, I've said a lot already, so I would like to pause at this point and let you all engage in some discussion, which I can see is already going on, which is fantastic. I would like to ask you this question. How do you motivate your learners to learn? What do you do that gets them really excited about it, engaged, gets them queuing up at the door or battering down the hatch of the IT department to get more access to the LMS? I'm going to pause here for just a few seconds and let that chat happen in the chat. So I'll hold for a second.
Thanks, Simon. Well, let's go on. Rachel has raised her hand. Rachel, I've started a private chat with you in case that's something which you wanted me to pick up on. We can discuss things offline rather than making it busy for everybody else. So we're sharing all our thoughts here, and I'm just going to provide a little bit more space because there's a lot of chat going on, and I think we're going to need to make this this area slightly wider. Everyone can read what's happening. Okay. Plenty going on. What's your thoughts on that, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here that are jumping out. Some of the things I like: make it relevant and meaningful to them, absolutely. Make them get hands-on, have fun, practice what you preach, interaction. There was a question before about what if it's mandatory? What if people don't have a choice? How do you get them motivated to learn? Which I think is a fantastic question. And then things like make it more fun, create the right learning environment. I think these are all fantastic.
We've got a bunch of experienced people on the line. They know what they're doing.
Well, absolutely, absolutely, and it's not going to be my job now to try and pick apart any of the things that people have said, but I think highlighting some of the key points, those bits that are going to be drawn out in the next session. So thanks very much. I think actually, Susan, they're linking to their role in achieving their goals, and those of the organisation share how it will be part of the future. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and we're going to talk a bit about goals and about the balance between having organisational goals and individual goals, and ultimately the need to have a mix of both. And if we can't find those individual goals, then the impact's not likely to be as great. But let's dive into it. I don't want to say everything before we get started. So motivating learners. So I talked about this desirable task, about motivating people to come to the learning, to try something different, to change their behaviour. Now, your reputation is going to be a huge part of that. Now, I know probably a lot of you guys are already thinking about your reputation. I worked for a number of years with a very experienced head of L&OD who had this phrase: do the basics brilliantly. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about trying to be excellent. Do the basics brilliantly, and people will love you. And you know, at first I think, well, are we trying to do something a little bit more? But it was absolutely spot on. Do the basics brilliantly. Get the simple things right. Don't make people have a bad experience, and they're more likely to have a good experience. People are more likely to advocate for you on your behalf. And this is one of those key points that I was going to make before. We don't do everything. We need to engage other people. So one of the things that we need to park in a little bubble here to pick up later: managers have things to do for us, else it won't work. So we need managers.
Sorry, I never interrupt speakers except when something comes up that I can't answer in chat. And Jane Butler has just asked, and I think this is pertinent right now, what do you see as a basic? So when you say do the basic things brilliantly, What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. So some of the operational elements of L&D, making sure people have access to the learning. If we're talking face-to-face learning, make sure people know where to go. Make sure people get their joining instructions. Make sure the trainer's there on time. If we're talking online learning, make sure that it's very easy to access the content. Make sure people don't have 10 clicks to get to the content if it's possible in 2. So I'm talking the real basics about access and opportunity, those types of things. And hopefully that's a straightforward enough answer to the question, but the things that people would expect to get right, the kind of service element end of the...
Presentation mode is now disabled. Presentation mode is now enabled.
Fantastic. So reputation then, we need the manager's support in doing that. So one thing to park in this box for managers, advocate for the intervention. And I'm going to come back to that at various different points throughout the session, and that box is going to get bigger and bigger, and then at the end I'm going to tell you how we do that. For now we'll move on to some of the other bits. Enjoyment. First of all, those level 1 evaluation forms that we give out at the end of classroom interventions, or the surveys that we send out to people who complete a course on the LMS, much maligned. A lot of people thinking about whether or not they need to do them at all. Hugely important. So my call to action for every learning and development manager in the room is to fish out your level 1 evaluation form. Check, does it ask whether people enjoyed it? If people enjoy it, they're more likely to go and tell other people they enjoyed it. And this works very much like your Net Promoter Score, and you can track this. This is something that you can use to say, people enjoy coming on this course, so they might tell other people that it's quite good. Moving on from that, reward. We need to be careful with this one. It came up before, actually, in the chat when I asked what people do to motivate. Reward, what's in it for them? We need to be quite careful with this. Careful on what outcome we're trying to achieve. So, for example, when I first got into this, when we offered first aid training, we said anyone who's trained for first aid will get a little pay award, an extra £5 a week or whatever it was. So not a huge amount, but that was our motivating tool, and we had bucket loads of people queuing up, loads of people at the door trying to get in to be first aid trained, not because they wanted to be first aid trained, but because they got a little bit of extra pay. So we had to try some different ways. So, for example, people going on a management program because they think they might get promoted, that's absolutely fine if it's true, but we need to be honest about the rewards that we're offering and whether we're incentivizing the right behavior. And finally, the last point on here, involvement. We need to bring in some more people in this. It's not enough for us to think we know absolutely everything. We don't do everything. We can't do everything. We need people to tell us what they need it to do. So the point here, learners will be motivated to attend your learning if they've had some involvement in it. Doesn't need to be much. You don't need to go out and talk to every delegate and do an LNA, but if you can get your learners to prioritise the outcomes. We have our learning objectives for all of our courses. If you get your learners to tell you beforehand which are important to them, that's fantastic. That gives them some control over how the session works. You don't have to change everything. You don't have to rewrite your whole course. Just get them to tell you which bits are most important. Then we can start looking at the desirable outcomes. People start focusing on what's in it for them. They can start thinking about their goals. And when we're talking about goals, we're not talking about any silver bullet ways of making people absolutely want to do it. What we're talking about here are a mixture of the learning outcomes which we've got, what do we think the course needs to do, and then what do you need from your manager? Your manager's going to set some learning goals, hopefully, which add to or reinforce the learning outcomes from the course. So I'm parking that in the manager's bubble there. We're going to come back to that because it's not enough for me to just say, get your managers to set learning goals. It's a touch more complicated than that. And I know that many of you will have thought, well, we're trying this already, and we've either had some fantastic success and you'll be able to tell me how you do it, or we've struggled and it's not as easy as those words suggest. Desirable outcomes also require self-belief. If I believe I can do it, I'm more likely to try. And again, it's very difficult for us to predict self-belief, so if you ask your learners how confident they are before they get there, you've got a chance of getting them to think in those terms, and you've got a chance of helping them build their confidence as well as their competence through their session. There's a fantastic point that's just popped up in chat. Measurable success for proposed learning should be a forethought, not an afterthought, and I literally couldn't agree more. All this stuff is are things that we do before the session, leading up to the session, in a preparation phase rather than in a delivery phase. I think that's a fantastic point. And then finally, just to unpack the last part of that rather wordy definition I gave you at the start of this section, we need a link between the desirable task and the desirable outcome. So does the course work? Do you know? Does anyone else know? What are you doing to show that the course you're running or the online module that you've produced does what it says it does? If you know that, tell people. That feeds into the reputation that we talked about before, and it also helps establish that the desirable task links to the desirable outcome. Okay, so we said quite a bit there, and we've given a few tasks to the manager, and we've given a few tasks to the learner. But I just want to pause here to just say what I think I've said for L&D to do. So let's have a look. Winsome Advocates, absolutely. So find out if your course works, show people that it works. Use your happy sheets. We might know an awful lot more about gathering information on return on investment, about learning transfer, about all the different ways in which we can show that it works. But happy sheets are fantastic ways to show that the courses are enjoyable. So let's fish those out and make your courses sound a little bit interesting. We do some fantastic work with a number of different organisations where we cover similar ground. But the important thing is that we make sure that simple things like course names are interesting and relevant. So sometimes it's a bit of a Ron Seal does what it says on the tin kind of job, like make your meetings work or get the work done or something like that. You'll find on our website, and I said that I wasn't going to bombard you with this in the session, but a couple of case studies that reference some examples of where we've done some fantastically interesting work, which has a great impact on people's motivation to attend the session. So that helps you with simple things like your cancellation rates and things like that as well. So helping cut down that investment, which helps maximise the return. Also, let's have a look at this. Give line managers information. So help them set goals, focus on the subject. We need them on side. So let's give them the information they need to set their goals and focus those goals on the subject that we're talking about rather than competitive elements. So goals much better if they're focused on subjects rather than be as good as the person sat next to you or be level with peer group or something like that. And the final point, involve your learners. Get their priorities and confidence. Those 2 points there, the last 2 points, giving your managers information, that's a simple push. The way that we do that here, I've got a devastatingly simple way of doing that, which I'm going to share with you at the end of the session. We're going to add a little bit more to that before we get going. But I'm going to share. It's a devastatingly simple form that we hand out to managers when one of their members of their team books on a course, and it helps them set their goals, focus on what the subject is and what the likely outcomes are, and it helps them commit to a couple of things which they need to as well. So more on that to follow. Involving the learners, get their priorities and confidence. We're already in contact with the learners, so we send them a short questionnaire that asks them these questions. And again, I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. So that's my version of how to motivate learners. And I'm going to pause at this point to just recap the plan for the session. So influence what people find desirable. Tick, done that. Let's move on to enable people to change behaviour. This is safe ground, I think, for L&D, so I know I'm going to get some really good answers to this question in the chat. I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds and let you have a think about this question. What 3 things should all learning interventions involve? Now, this could be your classroom learning, your online learning, your coaching, any way that you do it. Tell me what you make sure is in there every time. What 3 things?
And we want to be clear here, don't we, Simon? We're talking about learning interventions, not learning in general, but learning interventions.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
And these
right.
could be online or face-to-face?
Absolutely. Any way that we make learning happen, what do we make sure is in there so that it does?
So that learning happens. Okay. Really wide range of results here coming through. I notice we have quite a strong showing from Norfolk today, which is interesting. Quite a few people talking about objectives needing to be clear.
Yep.
Susan's pointing out that objectives need to be linked to the business goals. People talking about, Caroline mentioning making it engaging, making it humorous. Well, not making it humorous, so that was mentioned earlier. Behavioural goals, says Henrik. That's an interesting point. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a fantastic mix here of behavioural stuff, so doing and practice, and behavioural goals, as Henrik has said there. relevance coming up loud and clear there from Lisa. Clear objectives, relevance, application, focus. Someone right at the very start, I think it was Costas, said know, do, be, which I think is quite profound if I understand it the way that he means it. Okay, let's dive in. I think there's some fantastic stuff there, and all of this stuff is going to come out loud and clear. I think for those of you who are having problems with the sound, we've just put up the dialing in information again. So
I'll take that off. Move on the slides, and I'll take that off when you're good.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about what we need to do to enable people to change behaviour. Now, this is, I think, things that we do every day. So I'm going to pick out, I think, my 3 key things. I've asked you for 3, so I'll give you 3. I'm going to pop these up now. So let's help learners to shift from short-term memory to long-term memory. Now, what does that mean? Short-term memory, first of all, let's engage people. Let's be interesting. We've talked about that already, but let's make sure that we can have some impact. Now, there's a number of different ways that we can do that. We can be experiential, immersive. We can get people's attention with high concepts. We can also be visually appealing or exciting or engaging, interactive in the way that we present our learning. I had a great conversation with a learning and development manager not too long ago who was telling me about their health and safety training. Traditionally not a fantastically engaging topic, but the way they did it, they set up the room as a casualty department. And the delegates walked in, and it was like a scene from Holy City or Casualty. And they got people lying on the floor injured, they got people trying to help, they got people asking questions, and they were involved straight away. Now, it's not going to work for everyone, but it's a fantastically engaging way to get people bought in, engaging their short-term memory. The shift to long-term memory is where some of these great points that people are raising in the chat come out. Practice, practice, practice. Get people doing it, and then that helps them shift their memory from short-term to long-term. Practice, feedback, and repetition. The second point, help people manage when things go wrong. Now, we hear a lot about safe environment. I'm not a massive fan of safe environment. I like safety net environments. So I think safe environment makes it sound like you're taking away all the risk, that there's no point in, there's no danger, no element that it might go wrong. Think about learning to drive. Now, you're sat in a real car with a real steering wheel, a real accelerator pedal, a real set of gears in front of you, and you're actually driving that car. You don't want that to be completely safe. Completely safe would be sitting outside the car or watching a video, and we know those things don't work for learning to drive. So the safety net environment, you've got someone next to you, helping you if things go wrong, encouraging you, coaching you, supporting you, and also they've got a big set of pedals in front of them as well. So hit the brakes if it's going to go wrong. They can manage when things go wrong. A more grounded example, perhaps, if we're running a presentation skills course, we know someone is going to do a presentation in that course, and that's scary. We don't want to make it completely safe and say, well, let's not do one then. What we want to do is help them with something they might be struggling with. So what happens if I forget what I'm going to say or my mouth goes dry? Well, in that situation, you could put a glass of water next to your notes. If your mouth goes dry, take a sip of the water, have a look down at your notes, you're ready to go. Let's practice that. Let's do that. Let's help people understand how things might go wrong, predict, prepare, make sure they've got a plan, and then perform. Give them some practice, get them involved, get them doing it. Key point here, make sure it's their world that they're practicing, not yours. So just to pick on that presentation skills point just a little bit more, it's very, very easy for us to say, right, okay, so we're all going to practice the same type of presentation. That's going to be a presentation with some hastily prepared slides that's 10 minutes long to a group of 6 people who are desperately waiting for their turn to give the same presentation. That's fine. That might not be the context that people are doing their presentation in. So we've already given the learner some actions. I want to give them one more. I want them to tell you how they work. So I want you, before they come to the session, if they're doing a presentation skills course, ask them what type of presentations do they do? What do they use slides? Are they on a stage? Are they behind a microphone and a lectern? Or are they in amongst it? Are they sitting down with a group of people? And help them with their practical session to do it that way. Doesn't take much of a change, doesn't take much of a difference to the practical session you've got planned anyway, but get them to tell you how they work. Final point, show some variety in skill application. Now, I'll pick on a different example here. So let's have a think about running a Having Difficult Conversations course. Now, there's an element of that course which is hugely practical, probably involves some actors coming in or some role play, or definitely there's going to be some talking out loud. And the classic way of doing that is think of a situation that's going to come up soon. Think of the next important conversation you need to have, and we'll practice that. And that's absolutely great. We practice it one way. we learn that one thing. We're absolutely prepared for that conversation. But there are other difficult conversations that we have, and we might be in danger of over-preparing for the next one. If we learn it a second way, then that bubble gets bigger. We learn a range of things. So rather than one long practice, why don't we think about maybe 2 shorter practice sessions? Why don't we think about a conversation that a manager might have with a member of staff who is in danger of getting fired if they don't start showing up for work or start doing their job properly, and balance that off with a conversation with a client or a difficult customer. Still a difficult conversation, similar set of skills, but different context. If we can put in a variety of different ways that people can practice, they understand those skills in a different context and they learn them in a different way. So you learn the points that you've learned and the space in between. And that's the key point here. When we're talking about varying skills, don't do it one way. Do it one way, practice it, do it a second way, and learn the space in between. 2, 3 times, fantastic. Okay, so what we're talking about here, activate your learners, get them engaged, get them on board, get them involved early. The experiential stuff, the immersive stuff is fantastic. Doesn't have to be that. Online stuff, visually engaging, sounds good, looks good, feels good in the classroom. Have an interesting story or an anecdote to tell. Create those diverse opportunities to practice. Don't just do it one way, do it 2 or 3 different ways. Give some peer and expert feedback. Don't avoid those mistakes. Safe environment, fine. Safety net environment, much better. Let's get people doing it for real, but make sure they know that nothing's really going to go really badly wrong. And make those connections to the real world obvious. That's a lot easier if your learners have told you what those connections are. Okay, so 2 out of 3 done. So we're 66.6% of the way to creating learning with impact. The final point, just a little bit here, about influencing the environment in which the behaviour must change. So it sounds simple. In fact, it doesn't even sound simple, does it? But let's have a look at where we are at the moment. So at this point...
Sorry to butt in, Simon, but again,
please.
we've had somebody say, oh, immersive, because you just threw in a bit about immersive there. Ben Waldman would like to know, all right, what's your definition of immersive, Simon? Because there's a bit of a spectrum, isn't there, of how immersive you can be.
There is. Okay, so thanks, Ben. Thanks for that question. Immersive. Now, when the word immersive to me kind of it gives me as much as I need to know. So people are immersed in an environment, surrounded, completely engulfed by the scenario. So you might balance it off against a role play, for example, which is certainly experiential, but not immersive. So if I'm in an immersive learning scenario, I can't see outside of the scenario. I'm in it, I'm involved, I'm being myself rather than a character, and I'm using and applying my skills in a way which feels natural to me, with the benefit of some reinforcement and some stabilizers from either a coach or facilitator or my peers, my fellow learners on that, surrounded completely by the scenario. So that's what I mean by immersive. So the casualty example that I gave for the health and safety training is, I think, a really good example of this. So absolutely walk into the room and then that's the world. So not descriptive, immersive. So that's what I mean. So hopefully that answers Ben's question. So where we are now, just to slightly recap, so by the time we've got these two of the three things done, we have a group of learners well motivated to take part in your learning intervention, which has been advocated by your line manager and which has a strong reputation for being enjoyable, developmental and relevant. What we need to do now is make sure that we understand enough about the environment in which those skills are going to be deployed, both before and after, so that we have a chance of influencing what's influenceable and making the change really happen. So I'm going to pause at this point and ask you guys another question. What workplace factors impact on learning transfer, we could say the application of learning in your business? So when you've done your good job of getting motivated learners into a fantastic learning intervention, what happens after that stops it sticking? I'll pause for a few minutes and let you answer that question.
Some really interesting stuff here coming through, much of which I'm getting the sense is based in the hard-worn and won lessons of reality. Managers' time, being able to do it, being able to actually put things into practice. Again and again, that's coming through. Line manager involvement time, says Rachel. Performance support materials and tools, says Laura, helping people do it afterwards. Joe says managers don't drive. If you could just explain that. sounds good, but I'd like to have a bit more detail there.
Mm.
Simon, lots of things coming through. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the key bits that I'm seeing here, managers' involvement in a number of different ways. So that could be support, that could be goals, that could be caring, or knowing even what's gone on. There's a lot in here, I think, about opportunity. So learning the skills is great. If I don't use them, I'll lose them. In fact, just paraphrasing Karen's point, use it or lose it. And there's some stuff in here about having the resources, having the other bits that you need. So we'll try and pick up a few of those points. I think they're all fantastic points, actually. And I think, Don, you're absolutely right. Some well-won lessons here, I think, of learning interventions gone by. I think we'll pick up a lot of these points. So thank you very much for that. Let's dive right in. The trick, if there is a trick, which there probably isn't, but I'm going to phrase it in that way, the trick to influencing the environment is making sure people have got the right cue. Like any good actor, they're going to need to know when to perform. So what do I mean by that? I mean a few things. First thing I mean is the prompts. So what prompts do they have to get them to change the way that they work? We talked about goals already. We've got that. So we've got the line manager advocating for the intervention and setting the learning goals. We need some more from the managers, and I think these points have been beautifully illustrated in the chat. So what support can that line manager give or make available to the learner? What support can you give or make available to that learner? And that ties in very nicely with resources. So we might think from our side of the fence about performance support materials, handouts from courses, online learning, access to a coach. On the more practical level, this could also mean physical resources. So, you know, do I have the steel toe cap boots or the hard hat to do my job properly? Do I have time as a resource here as well to get this done? And as has been well brought out as well, do I have the opportunity to do what you're asking me to do, or to do what I'm now able to do? So I'm going to add some more stuff into this manager's bubble, and I'm going to say we need managers to set expectations about what support, what resources, and what opportunity are going to be there. And this box is starting to sound a bit more complicated, but like I said, I've got some simple tools which we use. No silver bullets, no panacea for all of your problems with your line managers, but some things which we've put into place which nudge us in the right direction, which get that massive wheel of cultural change or learning organizational change moving. And so prompts, all I'm doing here is illustrating the points that have been brought out in chat, so I'm going to move on. We've got the learner at this point, prioritizing your outcomes, telling you how confident they are, telling you how they work. We need them to tell you how they're going to use it as well. So the line manager is one thing. We can get them to say what opportunities they're going to have. How does the learner think they're going to be able to use it? We said at the start, self-belief is fantastically important in this. Having the confidence to know how it's going to be applied is a great way to help people believe they're going to actually be able to do it. Okay, so let's have a look at the other half of this coin, the other side of the coin, to prompt rewards. Doesn't have to be financial rewards. That's not what I mean when I say reward, but feedback, positive feedback. Are we reinforcing the right behaviours? Also works the other way. If people are getting feedback for doing it the old way, positive feedback for doing it the old way, they'll likely forget or realise that they learnt it wrong, blame your course for telling them the wrong things. There's a point here about sanctions as well, which sort of feeds into this negative feedback, and there's this well-worn story about the gentleman who goes on a course or spends some time with a coach and thinks, I've got a fantastic idea. What I'm going to start doing is wearing red trousers to work. And he puts his red trousers on, he walks into work, and everyone else is wearing their grey trousers. And they're looking at him a little bit funny. He's absolutely confident. Red power colour. I'm going to wear my red trousers. I'm going to get the job done. I'm going to be bigger, stronger, and faster than everyone else. Next day, still everyone's wearing the grey trousers. 2 weeks down the line, he's still the only guy wearing his red trousers. He thinks, you know, I'm not going to bother. I'm getting funny looks. I'm getting stick. I'm going to put my grey trousers back on, and it's all gone. So all that learning, if other people aren't doing it the same way, you're going to forget about it. So make sure we know that people don't feel like they're getting punished or getting a bad press for trying something new. We don't have massive control over that at all, but we are able to influence, we are able to advise and guide on the likelihood of success from our intervention if we have that information. If we get info from our delegates, from our managers, from our learners, we've got a chance of feeding that back in and saying, maybe this course won't work, maybe this learning intervention isn't the right one, or better yet, let them make that choice for themselves. Okay, so we're coming towards the end here, so I thought I'd sum up who does what. So the learner, what do we need to get the learner to do? We need to get them to prioritise their outcomes, tell you how confident they are. So the way that we do that, and it's not rocket science. We send them a questionnaire. So these are the outcomes from the course. Which matters most? Which ones of those are high priority and which aren't? And how confident are you that you can do that? We use that information. We pay attention to it. The fact that we ask the question works towards motivation. The fact that we do something with the answers helps us make the next stage of the process work well. We also ask them, how do they work? So this is different for different. I mean, for the presentation skills example I gave is I think quite simple. It would be more complicated for other ones. But if it's a presentation skills course, what type of presentations are you giving? Let's see if we can think about how we can incorporate that into the session and how you're going to use it. Do you give presentations? When's your next one? When's the one after that? How often do you do it? We can get a sense of how to pitch the learning and skills in a way which is connected to their world, not just to ours. So some simple stuff at the point of booking or at the point just before booking, if you can, get people to know what you think your course or your learning intervention does, get them to tell you how right that is for you. They can make some informed decisions about whether it's right for them. They're probably making those anyway. And then you can make some informed decisions about how you're going to position it all. Let's have a look at the manager, because I think this is probably the more difficult piece. Your line managers. We've said they need to advocate for the learning intervention. So let's get the PR right, first of all. Let's make sure that they've got something worth advocating and they know to advocate for it. Let's get them setting learning goals. So not the performance goals, but specific learning goals which are focused on changing behaviour in a particular way. And let's get them setting their expectations on the support, the resources and the opportunity that they're going to have. Now, I promised you I'd show you the tool that we use for that. What we've got here is I'm absolutely certain that almost none of you can see that clearly enough to read all of the good stuff that's in there. But this is a simple form that goes out to line managers. Now, we don't do this for everything, and some of you will have tried similar things before and will have experienced some of the pain that we've experienced, that sometimes managers don't do it, and sometimes they don't. But when they do, it really works. And the more that it happens, the more success we create, the more that big wheel starts to turn. It's a heavy thing. It takes a long time to get going. But what we do with this bit of paper, as it is here, or with this note that we send out to managers, we give them the script really to advocate for the course. We put it in their language so that they can just read it out if they want, and then we call them to action. Set the learning goal. We talked about goals having an organisational benefit and an individual benefit, so let's split those two things out. Let's make sure that we're able to capture what's in it for us, what's in it for them, and then the support required, resources available, and chances to use. No need to overcomplicate that. The fact that we're asking those questions is enough, and in fact is going to be enough of a struggle. So engage your line managers early. Don't wait until they book onto a course. I mean, we've learned this lesson. Don't wait until people book onto a course and send this out and say, oh, by the way, manager, as well as agreeing to and paying for this learning intervention, we'd also like you to do some work. Make that part of the expectation. Get that in really early. Tell good stories about how it's worked before. Get people involved. Okay, so we're coming to the end of what I'd like to say, because I'm very conscious that I want to leave time for you guys to chip in and ask some questions. So the final point from me, for you guys, focus on your PR, keep your level ones. Talked about that before. Make sure, fish it out at the end of the session. Check, does it tell me whether people enjoy the course, or did we cross those questions out when we were trying to find out how much people learn, or whether they're going to get return on investment from their level 1 form. Involve your learners, ask them those questions, and make it really easy for your line managers. Because they won't do it if you don't, and you don't need much from them. So I've treated myself to a big 3 ticks next to these points, and I'm sure that you'll recognise it's quite a bit more subtle, and there's quite a lot to it, but we are now approaching the end of the time. So any questions, fire them into chat. I'll do my best to answer them, or Don and I will do our best to field these questions.
Well, as you know, I've been looking at chat as we go along, but, you know, it's been pretty quiet, not much has been going on. It's one of the busiest, most interesting chats we've had for a long time. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you. Going on there. Of course, helped by the fact that we had over 160 people attending. So plenty of people coming in to listen to what you had to say, but thank goodness they did. It was well worth attending. Plenty to listen to here. Going back to that level 1 thing to begin with, lots of discussion around that to begin with. Just want to clear up the point there about level 1. You're saying level 1 is not a measure of the success of training. It is PR to help you spread the news about training programs, and it enables people usually to feel better about work. You say it's about training. It's like the Net Promoter Score. Is that right?
That's absolutely the way that I see it. The questions that you ask for the reasons that you ask them, and you have that information available to you. So I'm not asking you to cross out anything that you've got on your form that you're using and is working well, but just make sure the biggest value, my belief, the biggest value you can get from that form, and what we've seen work really well, use it as a way of finding out whether people had a good time on the course. Did they enjoy it?
Right.
It matters more than we sometimes give credit to. So you're absolutely like a net promoter score. Are people going to go away and tell good stories?
Okay, we've got so many questions coming in. Of course, I have notes as well. I'm going to throw some questions to you very quickly and try and be as succinct and precise as you've been so far, which is fantastic. Rob asks, would you say following good instructional design with adult learning principles is a good approach to take, asks Rob.
So the question is, would
Should
I
be taking good instructional design and combining it with good adult learning principles to underpin what you're talking about here?
I think absolutely right. I think the principles that we're talking about here, learn by doing. If we're not doing it, we haven't learned it. So let's make sure we get underneath the change that we need people to make. Let's fundamentally treat people as adults. Let's not position ourselves as experts, but let's make sure that we can give good feedback, good practice, and good developmental opportunities. So exactly that point I was making in the middle. Let's do some stuff. Let's get some feedback, and let's repeat that, and let's do that cycle as many times as we can so that we get that variety that we need in the skill. So in terms of our instructional design, if we're talking online instructional design, let's build that in if we can. So if we're looking at an online course, let's set some work-based assignments in addition to the quizzes and things that we'll have in there. If we're talking classroom instructional design, then let's get the practice in as often as we can.
Ruth has asked, can you put the L and D circle back up, please? Not quite sure why, but please do so. And while you're doing that, Dawn asks an interesting question. Dan, I'll come to your point about evaluations in a second. Dawn asks an interesting question. Due to the power of peer pressure, brackets, red trousers, do you think in-company training is more effective than open courses? Hadn't thought about it this way. What do you think? Do you think that having everybody to come together in a cohort enables that to be more effective afterwards?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question, and there's not going to be a 100% answer to this question, but I think the point's very well made that if we're looking to change the way that a team performs, having one person with the skill then need to be the advocate to try and change everyone else is going to be fantastically challenging. The point that we made about goals is we need that balance between organisational and individual goals. So what's in it for me? Why would the people wearing the grey trousers change their trousers? If they're not part of the learning, if they've not been involved in all of the things that have led to the decision to wear the red trousers, they're not as bought in as everyone else. So it takes more than just someone bringing some new knowledge back to the workplace to change the behaviour.
Comes back to the point about the power of stories as well. You say red trousers, we all know what you're talking about, and I think that was the point that was made in the chat earlier. A tremendously useful point to make, that stories are a powerful way to learning. Also, and I can't remember who it was who said it, so excuse me, made the point that, in fact, if you are asked to tell a story about something you've learned, of course, that forces you to put it in a way that not only embeds it in your longer-term memory, but also gives it an emotional impact that resonates with you. Dan was asking about evaluation, and I must come back to this whole point about about evaluation and when people say, well, it's always, Dan said, I found the relationship I have with delegates that the evaluations almost always say, great, because no one's brave enough to say what they think for fear of upsetting you. Well, you may be, Dan, that you just are great, because certainly when I was training, I didn't get all fives. Simon, what's your thought?
Yeah, no, I must admit, back when I spent time in the classroom, I wish everyone said it was great as well. So Dan, you're better than us. No, in all seriousness, I do absolutely recognise the point. We don't ask at the time. We have an online evaluation tool which gets sent out to people afterwards. So that embarrassment about needing to give you feedback on the trainer to the trainer at the end of the day, when that trainer's probably, let's be honest, spent the last 15-20 minutes telling you how good a day you've had and how good a trainer they've been, it's definitely a recognisable problem. We obviously then don't get 100% of the responses, but we feel we get a slightly more honest response. And so we overcome the problem, frankly, Dan, by avoiding it. But I hope that makes sense.
And I think it's also useful to send not just one bit of feedback, but also try and get feedback afterwards, and then further down the line and further down the line to see whether it's moved from simply being knowledge transfer to actual behavioural impact.
Yeah, I think that's
and of course, as you do, involving the managers in that conversation. And Mike says, thanks, Simon. Refreshing to know we're doing some good things already. I think actually sessions, we don't intend here purely to preach from a pulpit. he said alliteratively, but to share and to learn from each other. So yeah, absolutely. I would hope that people are doing great things out there, and it's good to hear it. Okay, so moving on. I mean, there's lots of stuff here. I'm trying to make sure everyone gets a crack of the whip here. We had a lot of aphorisms, actually. I'm just going to quickly go to the aphorisms section I set up under failure, because you said safety nets, and I just want to make quite clear, when you were saying people should not work in a safe environment but in a safety net environment, or train in that environment, I think it's really good. Ben asked, is it wrong to let people fail in their training? And I think that precipitated a lot of points about it. A lot of these different aphorisms, people saying, Costa said that if you fail to learn unless you learn to fail. Ruth said plan to fail to plan to fail, but I think the most popular one was probably Christos saying our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fail. Now, that's your point, isn't it? Safety nets should enable people to fail comfortably and not catastrophically.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So the 3 steps, the 3 Ps: predict, prepare, perform. So what my advice to everyone, for whatever my advice is worth, don't let people be surprised by failure. So let people predict the likely failure, plan for it, and then experience it.
Okay.
That's the message.
Good question. Esther's got her hand up. Esther, if you can send me, I'll send you a private chat in a second to pick up on that. Elizabeth Jones asked, a number of our team feel guilty about training as they think they should be working. How do we overcome this? It's a bit sad, but I suppose it is something that is common. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a shame, but not the first time that we've come across this phenomenon. Of course, what we were talking about right at the start was the PR of L&D, and sometimes it can be seen as a bit of a jolly, a bit of a day out. If it's not making that difference, my experience of working in and with organisations that have that problem is it's because the training is not grounded anywhere. Because when people go on training and come back, they don't really see any difference. They had a good day off, they enjoyed their day, they probably had a really nice lunch and plenty of coffee and biscuits through the day, but nothing's changing, and I think that's the key. And if you can manage your message about that, tell the good stories about the change that your training, quote unquote, has, then you can start to move that big wheel of cultural change that I was talking about before.
I'm getting so many questions coming through. I have to be honest and say we're not going to have the chance to answer them all, I'm afraid to say. But there were some I picked up during the course of it, but I'd like to raise with you so we can get those ticked off. And I think this is a very interesting point from Emma Cornwall. Any ideas on the top physical environmental factors that people feel are significant? This is to successful training. So I think that's a really good point.
So when we were talking about barriers before, the way that we were talking about that was in the workplace. So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, we're talking physical barriers either in the classroom or in the workplace. So
let's go with both. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with both. So physical barriers. So I think we spend a lot of time talking about how we can connect virtually with things like this, which we're doing this morning. So connecting over massive distances, so overcoming significant physical barriers to be here today. We acknowledge, I think, that there's an element of practice of that real getting to the behavioural stuff that is challenging over this type of distance, which is why, and I saw this skip through the chat a little while ago, but apologies I didn't catch the name, learning in isolation isn't going to work. So to think that those physical barriers stop the learning, it might be true that in the intervention it's difficult to overcome those and get to the behaviour, but you don't have to do everything. So on an online program, for example, setting those work-based assignments is a fantastic way of getting people to do the practice, and then they can feed back and you can connect with them either over the phone or virtually or something like that, and then you can start breaking down some of those physical barriers. I don't think there's anything that I've tried not to lean too heavily on face-to-face or kind of physically being in the same environment as the only way to get this done. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think probably we'd spend quite a long time talking about how to do the online stuff, and I'm conscious maybe that we hear some of the other questions, but hopefully that's a good start of an answer at least.
There are so many. I mean, I have to say, when I ran my 17-room training centre in London, for me, the top physical environmental factor in the place. There were two of them, Lou's and Lunch. That made a massive difference. And it sounds pathetic, but I don't know. But they're right at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid, and if you don't get that right, nothing else follows. Okay.
Yeah, it goes to that point about enjoyment, doesn't it?
I'm afraid so. Very quickly then, wrapping up with two more questions that we picked up during the course of the session. One from James Barrow. And again, it sort of follows on from that point. How do we secure involvement from e-learners? So very quickly, he asked the simple point, is involvement easier in terms of classroom sessions where learning can buy into what they're about to learn? Can we get that same sort of enjoyment and willingness from people online?
I believe we can, and I've seen it done fantastically well. Production values matter here, so visually appealing, sounds good, looks good, feels good, it works. Those things massively help with enjoyment. I don't think people need much convincing now that people can spend quite a lot of time online interacting with content. So that's because it's interesting to them and appealing to them. So I think the enjoyment factor is certainly a hurdle that while certainly it presents some conundrums for us, certainly some thinking needs to be done about how. It's definitely possible. I think we may be starting to feel that we've crossed that bridge in terms of what we can produce and what we can share over the bandwidth that we now are able to enjoy. I think the involvement question, though, is fantastic. The involvement that I was talking about was certainly ahead of the intervention, and some of the benefits that we talk about with online learning is they're just in time. So access at the point of need. So how involved could a person realistically be in terms of prioritising their learning or getting their learning goals before if they want to dive straight in? And I think the message here is that it's all about the connectedness of that learning intervention to the rest of what that person does. So if they're going on a whim and they're accessing on a whim, maybe you can't. But if it's part of a planned developmental journey for that person, if they have a learning goal and they access that content, they'll have some priorities. They can tell you why they've accessed that content. They can tell you why they're there, why they've bothered taking the time going to your LMS. And then you can use that information to better understand how well positioned your e-learning is. So it might not be immediate, but you can certainly start getting that information and feeding that back into the system.
You know what, I am looking at the questions coming through and I'm almost weeping because I cannot answer all these questions for you myself, or we don't have time to wrap up and answer them. I think somebody, it was Nick who said I sound like Jonathan Ague. I'm assuming that's a good thing on Test Match Special. He's the chap who has trays of fudge brought up to him from listeners, so if you'd like to send fudge and cake through, I'm very happy to eat that while we're having a webinar. But I have to say, it's been a marvellously intense, rich, discursive event for which I think we have to thank Simon. There were further questions, many of them I wanted to ask, in particular around managers, which you've correctly identified as being the crux of the matter, the fulcrum around which everything goes. I would love it if we could spend a whole another hour on that. We don't have time now. But I would love to just once again say thank you very much everyone for participating in the chat area. And once again, Simon, thank you very much for really making us think and sharing a great deal of your own thinking, insight and experience here with us.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks everyone for having me this morning. It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. Lots of people asking, gosh, there was a lot going on there. Do we get to pick up on this later on? Thank you, Aggers. My pleasure. A lot of people asking, yes, I must say that the slides, the recording and everything else will be available on the learningandskillsgroup.com. It is a free website. You can register there. You can be part of the conversation and so on. It doesn't cost anything. You can interact with 6,000 of your peers and continue these very valuable conversations that we've been having. I'm delighted to have been with you today. I'm just going to put that into the, no, I'm not because I can't find the URL. Yes, there we go. I'm going to put the URL into the text chat area so it's immediately available for everyone and as part of our record. There we go. Okay, so if you've enjoyed it, please, as I say, let people know about it with hashtag LSG Webinar on Twitter. Don't forget to go to Learning and Skills Group, and please be with us at 12 o'clock UK time. That's in 58 minutes when we've got Toby Harris and Dan Church of Saffron Interactive talking about building and supporting resilience through e-learning. Very much part of modern thinking, how we can make sure that people are resilient. Love to have you join us at 12 o'clock in 1 hour's time. Bye for now.